The town of Brookhaven followed the same quiet rhythm every morning. The golden sunrise spilled over rooftops, casting long shadows on empty streets. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh bread from the Brookhaven bakery, and the occasional murmur of early risers filled the air. And every morning, at exactly 6:45 a.m., Claire Bennett appeared. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with wavy chestnut hair that barely brushed her shoulders. Her big blue eyes were always cast slightly downward, avoiding attention. But the most striking thing about her wasn't her silence. It was the dog at her side. A large black Labrador named Shadow, whose sleek, powerful frame moved in perfect sync with hers. Claire and Shadow were inseparable. No matter the weather, rain, snow, or fog, she walked the same carefully measured path every morning. She stepped out from the small white house on Maple Street, strolled past Finch's grocery, nodded politely at Brookhaven Bakery, and continued toward the old clock tower, before turning down a narrow dirt trail leading to the woods. It never changed. The townspeople had grown used to the sight. "Morning, Claire," Mr. Finch would say, lifting a hand as he stacked wooden crates outside his store. Claire would nod once but never stop walking. "That dog is as well trained as they come," Mr. Dawson from the bakery often muttered to his wife. Shadow never pulled at his leash. Never sniffed at food or wagged his tail at passers-by. He simply walked beside Claire, matching her exact pace, his eyes alert, his expression unreadable. But there was something else. Something off. Claire never let anyone touch Shadow. Not even once. If a child reached out a hand, excited to pet the big black dog, Claire would step back immediately, shaking her head. Even when Mrs. Dawson, with her gentle smile, once knelt down and said, "Can I give him a treat, sweetheart?" Claire pulled Shadow closer and whispered, "No." Then, she kept walking. It made no sense. Shadow was never aggressive, never showed signs of fear or hesitation. But Claire acted as if letting someone touch him would be dangerous. The people of Brookhaven whispered, "Why is she so protective of that dog? It's almost like she's afraid. What if there's something wrong with him?" But one morning, Mrs. Dawson finally asked. Leaning out from the bakery's window, brushing flour off her apron, she called out, "Claire, sweetheart, why don't you let anyone pet your dog?" Claire froze mid-step. A rare reaction. For a brief moment, her fingers tightened around Shadow's leash. She turned slightly, her blue eyes wide, not with anger, but something deeper. Something that looked like fear. Then, without a word, she turned and kept walking. Mrs. Dawson watched her disappear down the dirt path toward the woods, unease creeping into her bones. It was only then that she noticed something that sent a chill through her. Shadow never left paw prints behind. The town of Brookhaven prided itself on being a quiet, predictable place. A town where people waved to each other from their porches, shopkeepers knew their customers by name, and nothing truly out of the ordinary ever happened. But then there was Claire Bennett. Every morning at exactly 6:45 a.m., the 8-year-old girl walked through town, clutching the leash of her large black Labrador, Shadow. She never missed a day. Not when the streets were covered in ice. Not when the fog was too thick to see the road ahead. Not even when the thunder rumbled overhead, warning of an approaching storm. No one knew where she went. No one ever saw her come back. At first, no one thought much of it. But as weeks passed, people began noticing things. Claire never spoke. Not a single word. She didn't respond to greetings, didn't laugh when other kids tried to talk to her, didn't even whisper to Shadow as they walked. And the dog? The dog was even stranger. Shadow never barked. Never wagged his tail. Never sniffed the ground or pulled at his leash like other dogs. He simply walked beside her, his golden eyes always watching. And then came the morning when Mrs. Thompson noticed something chilling. Mrs. Thompson had lived in Brookhaven for over 40 years. She had been a schoolteacher once, back before her hands had grown too weak to hold a piece of chalk. Every morning, she sat on her front porch, sipping coffee, watching the town wake up. That's when she first saw Claire. And she saw something impossible. The night before, there had been a heavy rainstorm. The streets were still damp, and puddles of water reflected the golden glow of the rising sun. As Claire passed by, Mrs. Thompson glanced down at the sidewalk. Claire's small footprints pressed into the wet pavement, leaving behind faint, muddy marks. But Shadow left nothing. No paw prints. Not a single one. Mrs. Thompson blinked, leaning forward. Maybe she had imagined it. But no matter how far they walked, Claire's prints were there, and Shadow's were not. She felt a cold chill crawl up her spine. Something wasn't right. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson told Mr. Dawson, the baker, what she saw. He frowned, wiping flour from his hands. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. She nodded. "I know what I saw. Watch her tomorrow." And so, the next morning, Mr. Dawson did. And he saw it too. Whispers spread through town. "That dog ain't normal. Maybe she trained it to step in her footprints?" Maybe, but what if she didn't? People started paying attention. And the more they watched, the stranger things became. One day, Mrs. Carter, who owned the bookstore, tried to give Claire a small bag of dog treats. Claire just stared at it. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. Mrs. Carter watched, confused. Then she glanced down at the bag of treats in her hands. And felt her stomach drop. She had been holding only one bag. But Claire's shadow on the ground had been holding one too. The children of Brookhaven were the first to act on their curiosity. For weeks, they had been watching Claire and Shadow, whispering theories among themselves. Some thought Shadow wasn't real. Others thought Claire wasn't real. So, one morning, a group of kids made a plan. They would follow Claire. See where she went. See what she was hiding. At 6:45 a.m., they waited, crouched behind parked bicycles and low hedges. As Claire appeared, walking the same route as always, they slowly moved after her, careful to stay out of sight. At first, she didn't seem to notice. But then, Shadow stopped walking. The children froze. The dog's golden eyes flicked sideways, staring directly at them. A shiver ran through them. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't even threatening. It was knowing. Like he had been expecting them. Claire, however, never turned around. She simply kept walking. And when she reached the edge of the woods, she disappeared into the trees. The kids hesitated. Then, one of them, a boy named Jake, whispered, "Now." And they ran after her. Branches scratched their arms as they sprinted through the forest. The morning light barely reached through the thick canopy of leaves, and the smell of damp earth filled their lungs. They ran faster, pushing forward. But when they reached the clearing just beyond the first row of trees, Claire was gone. No footprints. No movement. No sound. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. The kids stared at each other, wide-eyed. And Shadow? Shadow was nowhere to be seen. Mini cliffhanger, where does she go every morning? And why does no one ever see her coming back? Brookhaven was a quiet town. Too quiet, if you asked Jake Harper. At 16, he was known for being a troublemaker, not in the dangerous way, just the kind of kid who got detention for skipping class, sneaking out at night, or climbing the water tower just because someone dared him to. The kind of kid who didn't believe in ghost stories. And right now, he had a new dare. Follow Claire Bennett. It started as a joke. The younger kids had been whispering about her for weeks, daring each other to follow her on her morning walk, but none of them had ever gotten far. They always lost her in the woods. The way they talked, you'd think she had some supernatural ability to vanish into thin air. But Jake knew better. He knew the woods better than anyone. If Claire disappeared every morning, then Jake was going to find out why. At 6:30 a.m., he pulled on a black hoodie, laced up his boots, and slipped out the back door before his mom woke up. The air was cold, thick with leftover moisture from the storm the night before. His breath curled in the early morning mist as he jogged toward Maple Street. He didn't even have to check the time. He already knew. Claire would be there. Right on schedule, she appeared at the end of the street, wearing the same blue dress she always did, walking the same steady pace, her hand wrapped tightly around the leash of that huge black Labrador. Shadow. Jake ducked behind a parked truck, pressing himself against the side. He wasn't afraid, but as he watched Shadow's golden eyes scan the empty street, a strange feeling crept over him. The dog wasn't just looking around. He was searching. His head moved slowly, methodically, scanning the town like he was making sure it was safe. Like he was making sure no one was following. Jake shook the thought away. It was just a normal dog. Right? Claire walked past Finch's grocery. Past Brookhaven bakery. Straight toward the old dirt trail leading into the woods. Jake kept his distance, watching as she moved with the same eerie precision. No hesitation. No glancing at the sky or avoiding puddles like normal people did. Just one foot in front of the other. He followed, staying back just far enough to keep from being noticed. At least, that's what he thought. Shadow knew. Every time Jake took a step too close, he could feel it. The weight of the dog's stare. Not anger. Not aggression. Just knowing. But Claire? She never turned around. She just kept walking. The trees swallowed them whole. The deeper they went, the thicker the mist became. Jake had spent half his life running through these woods, but right now, he barely recognized them. The trail stretched ahead of him like a tunnel, twisting into shadows that seemed darker than they should have been. He hesitated for just a second before pushing forward. Then, suddenly, Shadow stopped. Jake froze. The dog stood at the edge of a clearing, body still as stone. And then, he turned his head. Not just in Jake's direction, but right at him. His golden eyes locked onto Jake's through the trees. Jake's pulse jumped. His breath caught. But Claire didn't stop. She just kept walking into the mist, never turning back. Never checking to see if the dog was still beside her. Jake hesitated. The air around him felt wrong, thick, like something unseen was pressing against his chest. A small voice in the back of his head whispered, "Don't go in." But Jake had never backed down from a challenge before. So, he stepped forward. And the air changed. It hit him like ice water, a wave of sharp cold rushing through his chest. His legs locked. His breath turned to smoke. The wind whispered through the trees, but there were no leaves rustling. No birds. No sound at all. Jake stumbled back, gasping. His hands went to his chest, trying to shake off the sudden chill. He blinked, shaking the feeling away, and looked at Shadow. But the dog was gone. 1 second he had been there, staring at him through the mist, and the next, nothing. Jake spun around, searching the trees. No footprints. No movement. Claire was already gone, swallowed by the woods. And now Shadow had vanished too. That was impossible. Jake rubbed his arms, trying to fight off the lingering cold, but it wasn't just the temperature that had changed. The woods felt different. He had spent half his life out here, but now it felt like he was somewhere else entirely, like he had stepped over some invisible line. And Shadow had seen him. Not just seen. He had known. Jake's heart was pounding now, but he didn't move. He stayed frozen in place, his ears straining for any sound, Claire's footsteps, the snap of a branch, even the distant hum of a car from town. But there was nothing. He wasn't scared. Not really. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was alone in the woods. He felt like the woods were watching him. Slowly, he took a step back. The cold lingered, stretching over his skin like unseen fingers, but the further he moved away from the clearing, the easier it was to breathe. By the time he made it back to the dirt road, the warmth of morning had started to return. Jake didn't tell anyone what happened. Not that day. Not for a long time. But the next morning, when Claire walked through town at exactly 6:45 a.m., Jake didn't follow. He just watched. And when Shadow turned his head in his direction, like he was still expecting him to be there, Jake turned around and walked the other way. He didn't know what had happened in those woods. But something told him he wasn't supposed to. Mini cliffhanger, what just happened? And where did the dog go? Jake burst out of the woods, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The cold was still clinging to his skin, even though the sun had fully risen now, casting warm golden light over the streets of Brookhaven. But the warmth didn't reach him. It didn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He didn't stop running until he reached the town square, where a group of his friends were huddled near Finch's grocery, passing a basketball between them. "Guys, listen to me," Jake doubled over, trying to catch his breath. They barely glanced at him. "What, did you finally see the ghost of Old Man Miller?" one of them teased. Jake shook his head. "No, I followed Claire. I followed her into the woods." That got their attention. A few of them exchanged uneasy looks. "And?" Jake hesitated, his heartbeat still racing. What could he even say? That he had felt the air shift, that Shadow had looked right through him like he wasn't supposed to be there, and then, just vanished. "I lost them." His voice came out lower than he intended. 1 second they were there, and the next, they were just gone. Silence. Then laughter. "Oh, come on, man. So, what? You just couldn't keep up? I told you, she's just quiet. It's not some creepy mystery." Jake's hands clenched. "I know what I saw." But they didn't believe him. And why would they? A girl and her dog disappearing into thin air? It sounded insane. Until Mrs. Thompson overheard. She had been sitting on a nearby bench, flipping through an old novel, but now she was staring directly at Jake, her wrinkled hands gripping the book so tightly the pages crinkled. "That girl," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake turned toward her. "What?" Her blue-gray eyes locked onto his, something unreadable flickering behind them. "That girl, she shouldn't have that dog." Jake's stomach twisted. He swallowed. "What are you talking about?" She exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to continue. Then, finally, she closed her book and stood up. "Come with me." Mrs. Thompson's house was the kind of place that smelled like old books and vanilla-scented candles. The walls were lined with faded photographs, dusty shelves filled with newspaper clippings, and stacks of paper piled high on the coffee table. She moved slowly but with purpose, reaching for a wooden box on the farthest shelf. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it and placed it on the table in front of Jake. Jake leaned in. The headline read, "Local family tragedy, Bennett family dog saves infant before perishing in house fire." A chill crawled up his spine. "What?" His eyes darted across the page. There was a photo, a charred, ruined house, firefighters in the background. And beneath it, another picture. A dog. A large black Labrador. With golden eyes. Jake's stomach flipped. His pulse pounded in his ears. Shadow. It was Shadow. Mrs. Thompson's voice was steady but heavy. 10 years ago, there was a fire in the Bennett family's home. The parents never made it out. Jake's throat went dry. But Claire did. Mrs. Thompson nodded. Because of Shadow. She tapped the article. The firefighters found her wrapped in a blanket near the tree line. No one knew how she got there. She was too young to remember anything. But everyone assumed. She trailed off. Jake's voice came out barely above a whisper. That shadow carried her out. Mrs. Thompson looked at him. And then she said the words that sent ice through his veins. "Jake." Shadow died in that fire. Jake's breath caught. No. That wasn't possible. He had seen Shadow. He had felt him watching. He had followed them. That's not, he swallowed, shaking his head. That's not true. He's here. He's alive. I've seen him. Mrs. Thompson watched him carefully, as if choosing her next words very carefully. Have you? Jake stiffened. His mind reeled back. Shadow never left paw prints. Shadow never barked. Never wagged his tail. Never reacted. And then, this morning, Shadow had disappeared. Not run. Not walk away. Just vanished. Jake gripped the edge of the newspaper. If Shadow is dead, then what the hell have I been seeing? Mrs. Thompson didn't answer right away. She simply whispered, that's the question, isn't it? Jake shoved himself back from the table, his chest rising and falling too fast. No. This doesn't make sense. It couldn't be true. It couldn't. Because if it was, if Shadow was never really there, then what was Claire walking every morning? What was following her through town? What had looked at him in the woods and knew he was there? Mrs. Thompson placed a gentle hand on the newspaper. Her voice was quiet but firm. Whatever it is, Jake, it's not just a dog. A cold, heavy weight settled in Jake's stomach. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to find out. Mini cliffhanger, is Shadow a ghost? Or is something else happening? Jake hadn't slept. After what Mrs. Thompson told him, his mind had been racing all night, replaying every moment he had seen Claire and Shadow. The way Shadow never barked. The way he never left paw prints. The way he just vanished in the woods. And if the newspaper was right, if Shadow had died in that fire 10 years ago, then what had Jake been following? He needed proof. So the next morning, he set his alarm for 6 a.m., grabbed his camera, and left the house without a word. This time, he wouldn't just follow Claire. This time, he would catch it on film. At 6:45 a.m., Claire appeared, just like always. Jake stayed hidden behind a row of parked cars, gripping his camera tightly as he watched her step onto the sidewalk, her hand curled around Shadow's leash. The dog walked beside her, calm, controlled, just like he always did. Jake lifted the camera. Click. The shutter snapped as he took a photo. He glanced at the screen. Claire was there. Shadow was there. For now. He followed carefully, keeping his distance, snapping photos every few steps. Claire walked past Finch's grocery. Past Brookhaven bakery. Right toward the woods. Jake gritted his teeth. This was where things had gone wrong last time. But he wasn't going to hesitate now. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. Claire. His voice echoed through the quiet morning. Claire stopped. A strange chill crawled up Jake's arms. Slowly, she turned around. Her green eyes were filled with sadness. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Jake took another step forward. Shadow moved too, stepping in front of Claire, blocking her like a shield. Jake had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the way Shadow's body seemed different now. His dark fur was flickering at the edges, like mist curling into the air. His golden eyes weren't golden anymore. They were darker. Jake's fingers tightened around the camera. Claire, tell me the truth. What is he? Claire's lower lip trembled, but she didn't look away. Shadow saved me when I was a baby. Her voice was soft, but steady. When our house burned, he stayed with me until help came. But I was too little to remember. I only know what people told me. She reached down, her small fingers brushing against Shadow's fur. But I know he's real. He comes back to me. Every morning. He protects me. Jake swallowed hard. She believed it. She truly believed Shadow was still alive. But that wasn't possible. And deep down, she had to know it too. Jake lifted his camera again. His hands were shaking now. Claire. I'm sorry. Click. The shutter snapped. Jake lowered the camera. And then, his stomach dropped. The screen showed Claire, standing in the mist, her hand stretched towards something unseen. But Shadow? Shadow wasn't there. Jake's breath hitched. He looked up. Shadow was standing right in front of him. But in the photo? He was gone. Jake's heart pounded against his ribs. If Shadow wasn't real, then what had Claire been walking every morning? The cold air wrapped around him again, pressing against his chest. His fingers felt numb, but he forced himself to look at Claire. She was staring at him now, eyes wide, as if she already knew what he had seen. You weren't supposed to look, she whispered. Jake took a step back. Claire, this isn't real. He's not. Shadow growled. It was the first sound Jake had ever heard from him. It wasn't deep or threatening like a normal dog's growl. It was hollow. Like wind whistling through an empty house. Claire let out a shaky breath. You have to stop now, Jake. Jake's pulse was hammering in his ears. Stop what? Claire, he's not there. He's... Shadow took a step forward. Jake staggered backward. His entire body screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Claire gripped the leash tighter. Please don't make him mad. Jake glanced at his camera again. Shadow still wasn't in the picture. But he was standing right there. Too close now. His golden eyes had turned almost black. Jake finally stumbled away, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Claire. What is he? She looked down at Shadow. Then back at Jake. He's mine. Jake didn't wait for anything else. He turned and ran. The cold followed him all the way back to town. Jake couldn't shake the feeling. The cold still clung to his skin long after he had run home. No matter how many times he replayed the moment, he kept coming back to the same impossible truth: Shadow wasn't real. At least, not in the way he had thought. He sat at his desk, his laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had to know more. There had to be an explanation. He typed in the words slowly, almost afraid to see what would come up. Bennett House Fire, Brookhaven. A list of articles appeared. His eyes scanned the headlines, searching for something, anything, that would explain what he had seen. Then he found it. Tragic fire claims 2 lives, infant miraculously survives. He clicked on it. The article was old, the text slightly faded, but the details were clear. The fire had started 10 years ago in the middle of the night. The cause was never determined. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. Claire's parents never made it out. But Claire did. Jake swallowed hard as he read. The firefighters had found her outside, wrapped in a blanket, lying in the grass near the trees. Completely unharmed. But the article never said who carried her out. No one had taken credit. Some believed it had been a firefighter, someone who had rushed in and saved her before disappearing into the smoke. But others whispered something else. Jake's hands trembled as he scrolled further. Some said it had been Shadow. The family's dog. The one who never left her side. The one who, according to the reports, died in the fire. Jake's stomach twisted. He sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, his mind racing. If Shadow died that night, then what had been walking beside Claire every morning? What had stared at him in the woods? The realization hit him all at once, sending a sharp chill down his spine. Claire wasn't walking a ghost. She was walking with a memory. Shadow didn't exist in the real world. He existed in Claire's world. A world where he never left her. A world where he still walked by her side, just as he had the night of the fire. Jake exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. It made sense now. Why no one else could touch Shadow? Why did he never leave footprints? Why he had disappeared the moment Jake tried to prove he was real? He wasn't real. Not to anyone except Claire. Because as long as Claire remembered him, he would never truly be gone. Jake closed the laptop slowly, his heart still hammering in his chest. He had been searching for proof, for something that would explain the impossible. But now that he had found it, he wasn't sure what to do with it. Telling Claire the truth wouldn't change anything. She already knew, in her own way. Maybe she didn't see Shadow the way everyone else did. Maybe she knew he wasn't really there. But it didn't matter. Because to her, he was. Jake glanced at the clock. It was almost morning. Soon, Claire would be walking through town again, just as she always did. And Shadow would be right there beside her, just as he always was. Jake stood and walked to his window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the empty streets outside. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to chase after her. He wouldn't follow her again. Wouldn't try to take another picture. Some things weren't meant to be proven. Some things just were. As long as Claire kept walking, Shadow would walk too. And in a way, maybe that was enough. Jake let the curtain fall back into place and lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to see them tomorrow. Because he already knew what he would find. A girl and her dog. Walking together. Forever. Jake never told Claire what he found. He thought about it, thought about stopping her one morning, showing her the newspaper article, explaining that Shadow wasn't real. But every time he imagined the look on her face, he stopped himself. Because deep down, she already knew. Maybe she didn't know in the way he did, with proof and research and cold facts laid out in front of her. Maybe she didn't need to. Because to Claire, Shadow was real. And in a way, maybe that was more important than the truth. The next morning, Jake didn't follow her. He stood on his porch, hands in his pockets, watching as she passed by. Claire walked the same way she always did, with the same steady steps, the same distant look in her eyes. And beside her, just like always, was Shadow. Jake didn't look for footprints this time. He didn't try to take a picture. He simply watched, this time with understanding. The people of Brookhaven slowly stopped whispering. Mrs. Thompson no longer started when Claire walked by. Mr. Finch didn't try to call out to her anymore. The kids who once followed her now kept their distance, no longer daring each other to see where she went. No one questioned Claire anymore. They let her keep her routine, because some bonds never break, even after death. She wasn't walking a ghost. She was walking love itself. Jake sat on his porch every morning after that, watching Claire as she disappeared down the road. He never told anyone else what he had learned. Some things weren't meant to be explained. One afternoon, months later, Mrs. Thompson sat beside him on the steps of his house. She sipped her tea slowly, watching as Claire walked in the distance. "You figured it out, didn't you?" she asked softly. Jake didn't answer right away. He just nodded. Mrs. Thompson smiled faintly. "Good. Then you understand." He did. He understood that some things weren't meant to be questioned. That love, in its purest form, could outlast anything, even death. He understood that Claire wasn't lonely, no matter how she looked. She still had Shadow. And Shadow still had her. Even if no one else could see him. Brookhaven continued on as always, the town settling back into its routines, and Claire continued hers. She still walked every morning at the same time, still disappeared into the woods. But no one asked her where she went anymore. No one tried to follow. They simply let her be. Because some things don't need answers. Some things just are. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Jake took his camera and scrolled through the old photos. He stopped at the one he had taken that day in the woods. Claire stood there, frozen in time, looking right at him. Her small hand stretched toward something unseen. Shadow wasn't in the photo. But somehow, Jake knew. He was still there. Because as long as Claire remembered him, he would always be there. Some dogs never leave their owners, no matter what.